segment of the show for today. We're talking to Professor Pickard from Tennessee State University, and the topic is Representative Richard Fulton and the Civil Rights Movement in a real sense from 1962 to 1972. And of course, Professor Pickard, let's see if we can pick up with the congressional representation of Representative Fulton. Let's start with that.
62, Fulton ran again. He'd only lost by 75 votes or something like that in the primary in 1960, and he ran again in 1962. That was without question that he would. At this time, he had the backing of the Nashville Tennessean. John Siegenthaler said they had some qualms about him right first, but they decided to back him. They didn't like Loser's record. And of course, the Tennessean was very pro-civil rights from the beginning. In fact, in the 1950s, here's a Southern newspaper that hired to represent them in court two of the most prominent black attorneys in Nashville, Avon Williams and Mr. Luby. So they backed Fulton, and this time in the primary, what happened on the night of the primary, it went on so late that Fulton fell asleep in Siegenthaler's office. The next morning, Loser was ahead by 75 votes, but it looked like there was some funny business with the absentee ballots in one councilman's district. And in fact, he apparently brought out the post-mortem vote, we'll call it. And basically, Harold and Pearl Bradley, both history professors at Vanderbilt and Fisk, respectively, led a movement in the Democratic Executive Committee to deny Loser the nomination. So they basically, the Democratic Executive Committee did not, well, they both ran as independents that year. Neither one was certified as Democratic nominee, and Fulton won that fall. And shortly after that, Siegenthaler got him an appointment with President Kennedy. He endorsed the programs of the New Deal, and particularly Medicaid, which he was very much interested in. Now, when he went to Congress, he had a controversy come up right away. He was the first Southern congressman to hire a black staff member. His secretary was a black woman, and he not only gave her a job, but helped her husband get a job there in Washington. And interestingly, he got some negative letters about this, not a whole lot, but from one very prominent businessman whose company is still his namesake here in town. Wrote him a letter saying that Negro, small n, Negro girl that you hired does not deserve that job and has not earned it, because these is white man's taxes that pay her salary, and this is a white man's country. And other people had similar letters. Now, the civil rights issue kind of dominated his mail over the next year or so. That was coming up. He had lots of negative letters from several business people here. Some had some legitimate concerns. Obviously, property rights is a concept that predates the United States. It goes back as far as, at least as the Magna Carta, as far as I know. And so they had some legitimate concerns, and then of course there are others who were writing things like, would you want your daughter marrying a Negro? Or another one, very prominent businessman said the Negro agitation is being paid for by the Jews who run this country. Fulton did vote for the bill. Now, interestingly, only two members of the Tennessee delegation voted for the bill that year. The other was Ross Bass of Pulaski, Tennessee, the birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan. He and Frank Clement were in a primary race for the Senate that year. And make a long story short, both were very pro-civil rights, as you may remember. Fulton, for the first time, had a Republican opponent who was viable. Bill Wills, a local businessman, later worked for Nixon. He got 50,000 votes. It was far more than any Republican had ever done in Davidson County, and which was the whole district consisted of Davidson County at that time. Now, 1965 came the Voting Rights Act. This was not as unpopular or as controversial, and in fact, again, a majority of the Tennessee delegation, including both senators, voted for the bill. He did make another proposal which might have caused more controversy that year when he sponsored the bill to end capital punishment in federal crimes. He was very anti-capital punishment. And then he didn't have a difficult re-election in 1966, but an issue came up in 1968, the most important one, and the one that almost killed him, was the Open Housing Act. Now, the Open Housing Act, ending discrimination in housing, was a bill that was very unpopular nationwide. It was really aimed as much at the North as it was at the South, with the housing discrimination and people forced to live in just certain sections of town. Fulton, on March 30th of that year, 5 days before the Martin Luther King assassination, announced that he would vote for the bill. He was the only Tennessee congressman to vote for the bill, although both of our senators, Howard Baker and Albert Gore Sr., voted for it, but none of the House. He said in his statement that a Negro policeman was recently killed in action. How could I tell his family they can't live where they want? I've voted to send men to Vietnam. How could I tell that man he can't buy, one of those veterans coming back, that he can't buy a home where he wants because of his skin color? And interestingly, the only Republican in the Texas delegation said the same thing when he voted for it, and that was George Bush Sr.